Welcome back, everybody. The two guys and a stack of comics. It is Sunday, latest episode of our Watchmen Challenge. Through this, Mike and I are trying to figure out what is the greatest comic book of all time. Over the next year or so, we're taking 10 or 12 classics and comparing them to Watchmen with the goal of trying to determine what the greatest comic of all time is. Today, we are on part two of our second challenger to Watchmen, the Frank Miller classic, Batman Year One. I'm reading it through the classic one here. Mike, you've got the facsimile issues. Is that right that you're reading through?
Yes, yes,
Yep.
I am.
No, facsimile issues, lots of great ways to get this, folks. Pretty good price on this for most of it as well. So if you want to read along, lots of methods to go through with Batman Year One. Um, we got our first issue. We get Batman's kind of amateur attempt at being Batman. Doesn't work out. No costume yet. We meet Jim Gordon, kind of a dual narrative of Gordon arriving to the city and Bruce arriving back, and we sort of leave with the classic "Yes, Father, I shall become a bat." Before we start
Yes.
with part two, and Mike, part two again, we kick off with Jim Gordon, and I admire the heck out of Frank Miller, and that this story, while called Batman Year One, is very much the story of two men and their approach to Gotham. So we start with Jim Gordon. What did you feel about the start with Gordon? How Miller kicks off this second issue?
I I was very intrigued because this, to me, this whole series is a Jim Gordon story. Batman's in it, but we already know Batman.
Mhm.
And we know, how he becomes, although this is a very cool take that Frank Miller has shown Batman kind of in the rough, just starting out. Whereas, Jim Gordon is a character that he's really fleshing out. And like we mentioned last week, basically the premise that, Gotham is so corrupt, and this character of Jim Gordon that we've come to know in the movies and then the media since then, this is really its inception of who Jim Gordon is and how important he is to the Batman mythos. And so I think, what Frank did is kind of catch a little bit of the mythos and really fill it in for us in an interesting way. I like the way, he's drinking his coffee, he's on his way to work, and, the radio he can't hardly hear, but he realizes that Brandon is in charge of this hostage situation. And he's like, oh God, he's going to turn it into a massacre. And so he hightails it over there and really, becomes a hero. And you can kind of see you know, the fact that the Goon Squad, Brandon's SWAT team, is, disappointed um, because Jim Gordon, becomes the hero. He single-handedly races up the stairs, saves those kids, and takes out the bad guy.
Yeah.
I mean, that was really cool. So we really get to see Jim in action, disarming the bad guy and throwing a punch. So he's no slouch.
Yeah, it's great work by Miller. Like you said, we know Batman, and while Miller is doing so much to kind of flesh out the origin portion of how does Bruce Wayne go from this determined young man trying to come back with the point of saving his city to the vigilante Batman. And there's stuff filled in here, but a lot of this is Jim Gordon and why Jim Gordon is the ally that Batman has. And I think, like you pointed out, we know this from media now. We've seen a lot of good interpretations of this, whether it's the obviously the Dark Knight series with Gary Oldman played that fantastic Commissioner Gordon on there. Batman the
Gotham.
animated series had a fantastic one. Gotham had that. While that show has its issues, it certainly fleshed out Jim Gordon. And this is really, like you said, the inception point of all that. We see why this man would be the one that Batman would team up with, in that the dueling narratives of Batman sees the corruption completely of everything. Gordon's the insider trying to do it the right way. And at every
Yeah.
turn, whether it's, Flass or Braden or Loeb, whoever it is in the police force, he's subtly realizing through all of this, trying to be a good man in the GCPD does not work. And we even see these, kind of slice of life moments with him at home with his wife where it's supposed to be his night off. And
Yeah.
Gotham just won't let him have it. And I think that's the cool thing about Gordon is it does show this man who does have the singular same obsession that Batman does. and why these two kind of become such great partners as far as that drive they have is all encompassing. And we see Jim Gordon, who has a normal life, pays a lot more for that than someone like Bruce Wayne. And I think that that's a really cool narrative that they set up to have that. We get some scenes where, like, there were the Loeb is kind of addressing the cops as far as, we can't touch Gordon now. Gordon becomes a hero in that
Yeah,
initial thing. It kind of shows why Gordon is able to survive some of that. And I think that's such great writing by Miller, because you could easily look and go, okay, well, why wouldn't they just take him out? Well, once
yeah.
Gordon does something so publicly, the press gets on his side. It gives him that layer of protection as well, and
It's
that I think
driving the
that's just really cool.
commissioner. It's driving the commissioner crazy, right? Because he's in with the mob. But again, we get to see these fight scenes with Batman as he's trying to, stop crime. He realizes he's, interrupted a bunch of teenagers in a petty theft thing,
Mhm.
and he doesn't do so well. He's failing on every issue, but he learns from his mistakes. You know, the kids are bashing him over the head with the TV they're trying to steal. You don't see Batman at his best yet, but he wouldn't be at his best yet because this is only like these are his first nights out adventuring, as they would call it in Watchmen, right?
Yeah.
Adventuring.
No, and it's where Miller does such a good job. This small little 2 or 3 page scene with Batman where he's basically just stopping petty theft. I think the cool thing is there's so much in that Miller's Batman, I think, in twofold is one of the best versions of the character in that the not I can't stand the Batman who's too good, right? In comic books, where they call it Bat God, is the tendency people call it, where this guy who basically with 5 minutes of prep time can wipe out, Superman or Galactus or whoever, right? Comic book
Yeah,
wise pitches that Batman basically in any comic book fight with 5 minutes of prep time would figure something out. And Miller
yeah,
does a great job of having a competent, smart, capable Batman, but still a man. And he emphasizes that at every turn where, like you said, he learns, he fails, he struggles. I love the part that Miller also emphasizes of Batman doesn't take a life. And so we start to see this in this scene with these kids. Part of that struggle is he's so worried about one of the kids might fall over the ledge, one of the petty thefts. And so
yeah,
he has to stretch and he's taking hits because of that. And that emphasis of the no kill rule with Batman. Miller to me balances that so well. And that I love his version of Bruce Wayne and Batman and that he is a hero. I think the one thing I can't stand with how they do Batman, and we get into this later issues, obviously, with Miller with some of the other actions. I hate when people call Batman an anti-hero. He's not an anti-hero. Just because he doesn't smile and wear a bright suit doesn't make him an anti-hero. He
right.
is a heroic person who, at the end of the day, is there to preserve life. And I think Miller balances the dark and brooding, but the equally heroic parts so well, especially in that scene where you see him struggling so much. We then pivot to a scene very familiar to some stuff from the Dark Knight movies and things like that, where we have the GCPD trying to figure out who Batman is. You get kind of the sketches on the wall of like
Yeah,
grotesque monsters and thing, and
yeah.
we're getting cops testifying that he's not human.
I
Bullets
know.
pass through him and stuff like that. I thought some really cool stuff there.
Yeah, yeah. There's some really good stuff there. And
Uh,
you see Flash there in a neck brace. You know,
yeah.
he's not human. I swear.
No, and I think that's such a cool thing, and that I do love that element of the story in terms of Batman becoming this myth, right? And
Yeah,
then Gordon being a guy who kind of sees through it immediately is not just a man. But I do love there is people instantly with this bat figure who kind of he's mythological almost to them. He's like, no, it's this creature. It's and they genuinely believe it. I think that's kind of cool that they have that. We get one of the most famous scenes in Batman lore after this, Mike, with a panel that has been shown over and over and over with Batman. Basically, he goes and declares war on the mob, the corrupt, everything like that. I'll let you walk through that scene. How did you feel that was handled? How do you like how Miller handled that portion?
it's so perfect because the commissioner, I forget his name, who the commissioner is, because it's not Gordon yet. He's still a lieutenant.
Loeb, yeah.
Loeb, yeah, Commissioner Loeb. He's on the phone and they're telling him about, he's telling him about the Batman, and he's eating. Meanwhile, he's got the mob bosses with him at dinner, you know, and Batman's outside ready to cut the lights and throw in the smoke grenade. And
Hmm.
and he's got everybody there, and he just sends the message. I like how, although his adventuring, quote unquote, has gone kind of has been kind of hit and miss. He's bold
Hmm.
enough, like he wants to strike at the heart of the crime in Gotham, and this brilliant scene where he blows out the wall and introduces himself to the crime families and the commissioner, saying, "I'm here."
Yeah,
And
you've eaten well, your feast is over.
yeah,
Um, I think what's so cool is again, this is where Miller completely gets Batman, and that, he's giving us in the story, we're getting chronologically like it's April 9th and then May 20th or whatever. So you're seeing Batman
yeah,
as the months go on get more and more capable. But again, it leads to a huge piece of Batman with this that they have Bruce kind of narrate talking about. He needs to be like a symbol. This is where that theatricality and deception portion of Batman comes in, where, yeah, some guy busting through the wall and looking like that is going to build the myth around the character. And I love that idea with Batman early on. Yes, he's incredibly skilled, but there is also a fear factor that Batman uses, and that he wants to feed that myth, add fuel to that fire of he's not human for some people, where he is this terrifying presence where just encountering him alone or seeing his shadow would cause people to have fear. And I think they do such a good job with that. You get after this, Loeb kind of reacts, start setting up these, ordering Gordon to capture Batman. We see, Gordon posting officers to kind of do fake attacks to
yeah.
kind of try to bait Batman. And of course, Bruce
They
doesn't
kind of
fall
trap
for it.
him. Yeah, and Bruce sees right through it. And then all the while he's doing it, he gets one of the criminals and steals his Rolls Royce and hogties him,
Yeah,
for his men to find. So the message is definitely out. Like, if you're organized crime, you're going to have to answer to the bat. Meanwhile, he goes to Harvey Dent. Gordon goes to Harvey Dent's office. He's trying to figure out who Batman is. He has an inkling that it might be Dent. And he's
hmm,
like, Dent, I see you're lifting weights or whatever. and and all the while Batman's behind the desk. So we know now that Batman is in league with Charlie
Harvey
Dent,
Dent.
Harvey Dent.
No, I love that there's the initial system, and I love that they make Gordon smart in that just because the order came from a corrupt commissioner, Gordon still has that line where he believes Batman initially is wrong. And so I
Yeah,
love that he instantly pins down Harvey Dent, who is this district attorney who's going after the corrupt and is in shape and kind of goes after him. I always thought that was a cool thing. And again, we see how much of year one is in the Dark Knight movies here that
yeah,
Nolan did, as far as that there was a lot in the Dark Knight about could Harvey Dent have been Batman, and people suspecting that. And I think it just shows how influential this work is from Miller. That even in the the highest, most respected Batman movies, so much of it is pulled from this. We
right.
see Gordon start working with Lieutenant Essen here. She's the one who sort of brings up Bruce Wayne and kind of mentions, hey, with Gordon not being from Gotham, being from Chicago, she might not know that Bruce Wayne is the richest. He might know that he's the richest man in Gotham, and that his
Yeah,
parents were killed by a mugger. And again,
right,
what I love about Miller is him addressing that. In that, one of the comic book things that we often question is like, what Bruce Wayne would be the obvious suspect to be Batman for most people once they see the toys and the gadgets and how much money it would take, and you have this kid who lost his parents very violently. And so I love that Miller doesn't ignore that. They don't kind of Clark Kent hide the glasses, hide who Superman is with
right,
Batman,
right.
where there is a thought. I think this is what Miller does so well with his writing is he kind of cleans up all the potential plot holes in these stories. I think one of the things he's so good at is you and I read a lot of these classics, and this is I think where we're contrasting to Watchmen. Moore does such a good job throughout Watchmen of when you go back and read it after you've read it and you know everything that happens. It's fun to read it again and go back and see, okay, were there any plot holes? Were there any areas where Moore did something that threw you off, but it doesn't make sense once the end's there? And the great thing
Right.
about Moore is when you read Watchmen, it's a bulletproof story as far as plot holes. All
Yeah.
it fits into alignment. There's nothing that contradicts itself. And I think that's one of the great things he does. Miller does that as well, so well with Bruce and so well with this story. And that all the obvious traps and pitfalls that you could look at of, okay, Bruce Wayne comes back to Gotham City. Batman appears. Instead of leaving that unaddressed, which he absolutely could have, he builds it and bakes it into this narrative and uses it as a building block of Batman and Gordon's relationship. I think
Yeah.
that's just so cool, and that so many writers would fail to do that or address it or not build it well. I think he does so good with it. We kind of come to the end, Mike. We get this setup scene, truck sort of out of control. Batman's out on patrol, and we run into Gordon and Essen, and we sort of see where the tide starts to shift a little bit for Jim Gordon and how he sees Batman. And so we get the setup of the scene. How did you feel about the action scene we get here as a close of this issue?
Well, Gordon tries to be the hero once again because he's one man against the city. Well, he
Hmm.
d- he doesn't. I don't think at this point does he really realize that Batman is fully on his side.
Yeah.
And after this incident, he sees him as an ally because they were both. He was trying to jump into the truck and steer it away from the old lady,
Hmm.
and he's not going to make it in time. But fortunately, Batman does,
Yep.
and he saves the lady, and he realizes that they're after the same thing. They really truly are on the same side. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very important, but it ends up getting Batman cornered, which is also, directly, you know, this is what Nolan pulled from for Batman Begins. I mean, this scene is iconic.
Yep,
You
the Batman kind of cornered by the GCPD. Of course, in the Nolan film we get the epic Batmobile sort of
Yeah,
chase escape, but here we get very much a grounded Batman. And I think this is where Miller, we haven't talked about it yet, but this is where David Mazzucchelli, the artist on this, some of the things he does so well. I think he does the perfect balance of you get an image like this of Batman, of the myth, the cool BA Batman moment. You contrast that with, again, this is just a man, where you get a panel like this where he's shot in the leg and limping. And I think
yeah,
that's the real cool thing that Mazzucchelli does is there's a sense of realism to all of the artists' work in this, and that one the atmosphere around Gotham, it is so gritty and dirty and just looks like this awful place. And I think again we can bring up sort of the colorist here in Richmond Lewis, who does such a good job of kind of drowning out what Gotham looks like. And then, of course, you get, the firebombing of the building and Batman is trapped, and we kind of leave it from there. Overall, it's just such a good story as far as
brilliant,
setting up Bruce.
brilliant color work on that page. You got all your primaries there and beautiful artwork and just a
Hmm.
really good job on the coloring.
No,
Yeah.
it's one of the things that strikes me whenever I read year one, and I have probably read this 10 times before, but it's probably been a good year or two since I picked it up. I think one of the things you really get from this is how much time Miller dedicated to the Bruce Wayne and Jim Gordon partnership. And I love that it builds at a natural pace. It builds at this believable pace of these two guys who are both fighting the same battle. Like you said, that scene with the truck. Gordon is capable. He's trying to do the heroic thing, and it isn't until Batman is there at the same time to kind of do what he was trying to do that he starts to realize, like, okay, this might be more of an ally than
Yeah.
someone I need. We're kind of on the same side, and I love that believable part of it because there is always that question of this by the book cop of Jim Gordon. Why would he allow this vigilante to have such a prominent role later? And these are the building blocks of it that show it. It's really, really good. Again, I think Miller does such a good job of buttoning up the story to where, as a reader, even if you're looking for the plot holes, you can't really find it because he
Mhm.
does such a good job with it. But any closing thoughts on it before we end here with part two, Mike?
This is probably like the third time that I've read this story. It still blows me away. 'Cause I probably haven't read it in a couple years,
Hmm.
uh, but it still blows me away. The fun of getting to know Gordon from the other side, and then kind of putting all the pieces together. I didn't read this when it came out. Uh,
Hmm.
I saw the Batman trilogy before I read this, but putting it all together and understanding that this is where it all came from is just amazing. You're left wanting more because it's such a good story.
Absolutely. No, so building blocks of a ton of what we know is the Batman mythos on screen and everything are from this story. But let us know your thoughts down below. This is the end of part 2 of it. Again, this is a 4-issue series, so we got 2 more to go, and then we will do our compare and contrast on this and sort of rank where does this go among the great graphic novels of all time. As always, folks, thank you for watching. God bless you. You have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.